Hi everyone, welcome to the WPP podcast, live at the WPP house on the sidelines of South by Southwest Sydney, the first time we've had the event come down outside of Austin, Texas. We're here on day 5, the final day of the WPP house, and I'm delighted to be joined by Ali Tilling, Chief Strategy Officer for VML in Australia and New Zealand, and Paul Nagy, Chief Creative Officer for APAC at VML. Welcome both.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you.
Well, this week we start off with a really fantastic session all about looking at gut data and kind of what the role that plays. And obviously we've seen a lot of evolution of technology. AI has been a hot topic this year. So maybe we can start off about talking about the role of humanity and creativity in our industry.
Yeah, sure. Well, I can jump in if you want, or yeah, we can. I think we can both riff on this a bit. So I think it was interesting actually when we first thought about that topic, and we were kind of like, oh, it's not about hating data or thinking data doesn't matter, but it is about, one thing we were really interested in is that kind of 1% that we believe separates humanity from the machines. Just being that little bit of magic, that little bit of kind of hairs on the back of your neck standing up. And we were trying to, we spent a bit of time, didn't we, really trying to define the power of that. And then we kind of realized we were trying to define the undefinable, and in a way that is kind of the bit that you want, that undefinable bit that you almost can't teach a machine or an AI, generative AI.
Well, we hope you can't.
Yeah, we hope you can't. I think that's true. That's right. We hope you can't. You can't for now. But I think that was what we kind of dug into, wasn't it?
Yeah, I tell you what was fascinating about it was, I think, generally speaking, Ali and I have been around for quite a while. You do often with a lot of subjects, you've got a really set definition in your mind on how things go. But when it came to the importance of going with your gut, we really had to really work on this, because, AI has come into the scene so quickly and is doing genuinely extraordinary things, right? So suddenly you kind of go, well, can they? If instinct is really just based from learned experience, could a machine over a period of time, if it's given enough input, actually start making those kinds of creative leaps that we make? And I think what we got to in the end was, well, we're not sure that we can, simply because AI looks backwards. And I think to make these to go with your gut the way that Ali and I sort of have to do at a professional level every day, I do think there's got to be a little bit of that magic of sort of imagining what comes forward and doing what is unexpected. And that's the bit that we just go, I'm just not sure any technology will ever be able to do that as effectively as a human brain.
Yeah, I think, what we've seen a bit recently is, artificial intelligence. Obviously, we're all kind of getting to grips with that. It's been around for a while now. We're starting to kind of understand it and really use it, I think, as a force for a lot of help in creative work, and we can maybe talk about that later. But we've started to see artificial empathy come through, so that's something we're trying to deal with at the moment. But I haven't heard much about artificial intuition, so that was where kind of part of this idea came from. And I love the idea that we kind of get more comfortable as a human race, I suppose, with the idea that we can't necessarily tame everything and box everything up and tie it with a nice ribbon. And I believe that creativity is one of those things. I don't want to be able to do that with it. I want to be able to kind of give a brief to our creative department and just have it go somewhere that I hadn't imagined, and probably they hadn't imagined before they kind of started getting to grips with it.
I think it's those words, intuition and imagination. I think that's kind of the gap. So then, in terms of your creative process, do you see AI as an input tool rather than an output tool?
Yeah, I certainly do. And in fact, I'd say that the fact that it is an input tool is what makes pure creativity so important. So whenever I'm asked, why is creativity important? I always have one standard answer. It's because that's what people value. You watch people scroll through on their phones. When that finger stops, it's on something interesting, creative enough to stop. Exactly. What's happening now with technology as an input tool is, in my opinion, it's just allowing everybody, the masses, to be a bit better at being creative. And what that means is that, generally speaking, being sort of average good at creative it's much, much, much easier. And therefore, I believe being genuinely creative, to stop those fingers, to grab those eyeballs, to grab that attention and engagement becomes that much harder, that much more valuable. That's why you need professionals that, you know, that are really, really good at doing it.
Yeah, I think for I agree with all that. And I think for strategy as well, it's interesting kind of with the team, we've obviously been starting to explore kind of how we use Midjourney, how we use ChatGPT, et cetera, as I'm sure kind of everyone has. But I think there's kind of two things about that I find pretty interesting. The first one is, and this is probably going to sound a bit wanky, so forgive me, but I do think this is interesting. We've seen and heard a lot about prompt engineers, and that's going to be like the job of the future and all that. And it is so fascinating when you start to think about your prompts in different ways and the different kind of things you get spat back at you. So we actually coined this term of, instead of being a prompt engineer, be a prompt empathier. Like you've kind of got to think, you've almost got to have empathy with the tool and think about what it's going to kind of spit back at you, which for strategy actually leans into kind of that core thing of curiosity and being able to use that. I think the second thing is, and I know we all know this intellectually, but sometimes when you use AI, one of the most fascinating things is you see confirmation bias like played out before your very eyes. I was reading something this week, and I did it on the tool, which was asking a prompt about Israel and Palestine, and just the way that the tool gave information back about, and there's no opinion here, I'm talking about what it gives back to you about Israeli deaths and Palestinian deaths. Like there's a lot that we have to kind of think about. And of course, like we're teaching it. And I think we come to regard it as almost like this separate voice, but we've told it that.
Fantastic. And I think if I think about some of the work that you have both produced over the recent months and years, you know, we've seen a campaign that won at Cannes where you strapped a Fitbit on a chicken. We've seen bracelets created for a university as a way of checking that your drink's not spiked. So I think it's that intuition, that imagination, but also the ability to know what your consumers' unmet needs are, but then be specific about what's this one thing we're going to choose to do or not to do. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that strategic and creative process of, okay, so if we have these tools for input, how do we then find that spark, that human element?
I think it's really difficult, and that's great. Yep. Like that, nothing makes me happier than, you know, like, you know, Ali was talking about prompt engineers, et cetera, and you can see, we've got these exciting young creatives all over the world at the moment that are playing with these tools, and you can see them having a great time. And I know that they want it to be an answer to making conceptual leaps. Like, for example, we've got a brand that wants to show how wonderful their chickens' lives are whilst they're producing eggs. You know, let's strap a Fitbit to its back and print the amount of egg steps that it takes directly on the egg, right? They'd love to be able to do that, but what I see is them struggle with it. You know, to Ali's point, it occurred to me the other day, everything in your phone is retrospective. Every single thing that you see in a mobile phone is what's happened. Not one single skerrick of it is what's coming. It still can't do that. So what AI is learning from, what these tools are learning from, and from us is always what's been. And our job is really, as I sort of said earlier, is to magic up what's to come and what people will care about tomorrow. And that's what makes it such a difficult input tool for me, I think.
I think so. And I think as well, it's interesting, it's kind of similar with strategy, right? Because when you start out, you kind of get the sense that young strategists, they're exploring obviously different ways of doing things, as they should be. But there's this sense that they want the framework or a tool to kind of tell them the answer. And you're always kind of saying, like, you can't framework your way into this stuff. You can't tool your way into it. No digital ecosystem is going to give you that kernel of an idea. And it doesn't mean we don't need those things. It doesn't mean they're not useful. But there's a point at which you have to take the tension, really, and actually see that as exciting. Like that point where you don't know, that's the best bit of the whole thing.
Fantastic. So then with all this evolution taking place right now, and both of you are considered some of the best in the industry, how do you train that next generation of strategists and creatives? And what would your advice, especially on the sideline of an event like South by Southwest, be in terms of inspiring yourself, learning to be a better creative or a better strategist?
Well, I don't think it's changed, which is fantastic. Like, I guess my philosophy for all of my young creatives forever has been try not to get your inspirations from advertising. You know, get your inspiration from the real world. And I genuinely don't think that has changed in any way, shape or form. South by Southwest is a fantastic example. We've got, you know, I know that there's a talk downstairs about, you know, surfing, and I've seen incredible things about fashion, and, you know, you need to be a student of the world to genuinely be able to make these creative leaps. But the other thing is, it's just hard. It's hard to train people. It's a leap of faith. I saw this thing the other day that made me feel good. I've got 3 daughters. Ali's got her two daughters right outside the door, and
not making me feel tense at all.
At all, no. And I saw this great line that gave me a lot of comfort, and it just said, "Parenting's only hard when you're doing it right." And you can draw a lot of parallels to that, I think, to the creative process and to the strategic creative process, is that it's hard, and it should be. Because if it's not hard, the minute it's not hard, I'm telling you this, the minute it's
pushing the boundary,
and it will stop being interesting.
Yeah.
So the minute if there's a tool, if AI gets smart enough one day to be able to do a certain level of creativity, it will become boring until someone flips it and does what you don't expect. And that's the thing. I'm just not sure that, you know, machines will only ever be good at doing what you expect, not what you least expect.
And it's really interesting that you say that, because actually yesterday Nicole Kidman was on one of the stages at South by Southwest, and she said, you know, creativity is when you go and find and do things that people haven't done before. And so it's that very thing of, you know, AI is built on historical data. Your role as a creative is to go do something brand new, take that risk.
Yeah, exactly. I just don't know how. When I think of that moment, we first saw the Fit Chicks idea, and it was written on a post-it note, and basically the image that won the Gold Lion at Cannes, which was the egg with the steps on it, is literally the first image that was ever drawn.
Born out of that idea.
That's right. So it was just replicated like that. But when I think about that, the thing that I instantly adored about that was the leap into something that I'd never seen before ever. And if I think of trying to be an engineer or a prompt engineer or whatever it might be, and trying to teach technology to make a leap into an infinite, you know, sort of future, and draw those two parallels, link those two things, I can't even imagine how you could start. Anything retrospective I can get, but into the unknown future, I'm not sure how you program for that.
Yeah. Because you've really got to connect the dots just in a new way. But the thing I love about Fit Chicks, and I can't take credit for it at all, but is there's just such a simplicity at the heart. And that's what, if you think about how your brain works and what's memorable to you as an idea, like anyone in the world, any human being, your brain is programmed to want something that is just familiar enough, but just new enough that it stays at the top. Like, that's how everyone's brain works. And when you see ideas, I think that's part of what you learn to chime with when you're reviewing ideas, is that kind of sense of, it's just vivid enough. It's just on the other side of that line. But it's not so far that you're left confused. And I think actually that leads me to something that is, I think, good advice to strategists, and something that's quite hard to get used to, I think, at the start of your career, because, well, 2 pieces. First is you've got to get out of the glow of the laptop screen, like you've got to get out into the world. And I think almost for strategists that is, in a different way, almost more important, because you've really got to, like, we hide behind so many words. I was reviewing some FE entries the other day, and it was like, I don't even understand what this title means. And I'm not stupid. It's just you've over-strategized it into this place. But I think the other thing that's interesting, has now escaped me, and it was more interesting than that. Let me just remember what it was.
Damn it.
Yeah, well, I know what it was. It was, I think, like when you're
a moment of inspiration, live, a live demonstration of inspiration.
It's like strategy in action, vagueness in action. And when you're a strategist, particularly in a creative agency, right, you're partly there because you are a bit creative. And so you start out wanting to make some of that leap yourself. So you start out wanting your briefs almost are ideas. And you've kind of got to get used to that's actually not what's useful. You need to have had some ideas in order to put that brief together, but you really need to get proud of a brief that is brief, something a lot of strategists have an issue with, brief, clear, and fertile. And being fertile means you're not going too far. And that's, I don't know, like, is that, I would say that those are the briefs that are the most useful, aren't they? If there's too much in there, you can't.
100%.
Yeah.
And the thing that I love is what you're talking about is trying to put themselves into the brief, because I had this, and we talked about it a little bit at the chat on Monday night.
Yeah.
Was this idea of I've got the directional capabilities of like a thong, right? I can't, if you spin me around once, I'm usually lost. So I love navigators, modern navigators. And I was thinking about it the other day and sort of going, isn't it great that these days I don't have to worry about getting lost? And no one does. But it then occurred to me, like, we are kind of being designed now as human beings who don't have to know how to get from A to B. We don't have to navigate. We don't have to remember the way we went last time, et cetera, et cetera.
Variation of that intuition.
Exactly, right? But the problem is, what that means then is that we're all going the same ways to the same place. You know, if all
with
of
the
us
same information,
with the same information at the same speed, you know, and that's what I mean by creativity. Suddenly, that becomes that thing that everyone's walking the same line at the same pace. Anyone that stands out of that's the bit that's interesting. And if you talk about, if we've got all these creative strategists all using these amazing tools to find their way from A to B, writing these big long briefs, they're just going to be slices of exactly the same thing. Whereas what you want yourself in there. You know, I want Ali's personality, the way that she takes things, her sense of humor, her sense of crazy. You know, I want that written into the
which
brief.
is lucky.
You know, yeah. But you know what I mean?
You're right, but anybody's, and people will have different, I think you're right, people have different, you know, you'll get different flavours of that from different strategists.
Yeah.
But that's part of, I think that's part of what's great as well. And the same as you'll get ideas written up differently from different creatives, and different creatives like briefs to be written a different way. And that's all, to your point, it's all part of what makes it not doing the same thing day in, day out. I'd say if there's one thing my job isn't, it is ever doing the same thing, basically ever. Yeah,
exactly. And that's your brand. It's funny, on stage, I was midweek sometime, I heard a question asked, like, how would you define a brand? And the way I would define a brand is it's a product or service's personality, right? That's their personality. And that's why we don't like it as consumers when their personalities change or become too opinionated or aggressive or whatever it might be. We like that to be their personality. You know, it's their DNA. And that's what I'd say the same thing about a creative person or a strategist is, whilst you're using, you imagine if all brands used computers to define their brands, that all of a sudden they wouldn't have personality, they wouldn't have their own individuality. And the more you use these tools, the less you are an individual, the less your individuality shines through. And that's why, whilst I love them, and I love tech, I love data, I love all those glitzy toys, but I know the value of my individuality, I know the value of Ali's, I know the value of each creative's, you know, their DNA, their personality that they're inputting, and I would never, ever want to lose that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but just to add to that, because I was just thinking as you were talking, that it's also not, it doesn't mean, or certainly from a brief point of view, it doesn't mean like make the brand like Ali, but it gives you permission to get out of thinking about it as a brand, like as a kind of, well, I've got to meet all these corporate rules. And I think it just sets you free a bit, because you've got something that's written in a way that someone has been their authentic self, and so it just liberates everyone, I think.
I totally agree.
Yeah. I think it's that point of liberation, but also, Ali, to your point earlier, some of the best ideas, I think, in our industry are the ones where you go, that is so simply incredible, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
And it's finding that little golden nugget where I think, you know, okay. And so I think, to your point, it's about giving the creative team enough space from that strategic point of view to go think of those ideas rather than pre-prescribing it.
Yes, yeah. And I think something we heard a lot about, we had Roger Boyd, our Fit to Honest Eggs client, join us on stage on Monday. He's just, I mean, he's an incredible person, and I think an incredibly talented marketer. And I think one of the things he spoke about that I found really powerful was kind of that sense of knowing you've got to learn when to leave an idea alone. And agency, client, strategist, creative, everybody, we've all got to learn that. And it's so hard. And I don't know if you get this, but I almost feel like I'm learning that afresh every time we kind of sell work in. Because it's obviously different for different clients, or it's different for different ideas. Like some of them you do need to provide a bit more evidence, or they do need to make a case to the board in a slightly different way. But there's a kernel of truth at the heart of the very best ideas that is the thing that your gut believes in. And so gut instinct, I think, is a really important tool for the long term, because you kind of think of it as this bolt of lightning and like, oh, my gut said that, and then it's all fine. But actually, that is what keeps you holding on to that kernel through all the kind of ups and downs, all the ins and outs. Any idea is pummeled from every direction. And so it should be like the best things are going to be made more robust for that. But we've got to know when to just leave it alone. When there is no more feedback, you don't have to keep chipping away. None of us. I'm not saying just clients for this. Like, you've got to learn when to...
Being selective, right?
Yeah, and being restrained and just understanding when to keep it flourishing.
And you've got to, and I love that. And you've got to embrace how hard that is.
It's so hard.
It's like going with your gut should be just like going with your heart. It's not easy. It's not obvious. You know, we fall in love with strange things, and it should be the same thing with ideas. You know, like we know there's something there, but we can't quite put our finger on it. And the minute that's science or math or programmable, it just won't be interesting anymore.
I think that's what Katie Riggs-Smith, our Chief Strategy Officer for WPP, also spoke about, is often just as hard to decide what not to do as what to do. And I guess, Ali, building on your point, it's also knowing when to start and when to stop.
Yes.
When you've reached that destination.
Exactly. When there is no more to say, or when's the time to just leave the silence to get people to believe in what they're doing. I think there's also, I think there's a danger with topics like this that you come off sounding, I don't know, kind of fluffy or something. And I would say, first of all, I've been doing this gig, well, not this specific gig, but the general strategy gig for over 20 years now. And this is I think I believe in this topic so much. This is the part of my role, certainly, that I definitely want to hang on to, right? I love it. So I'd say it's not fluffy. And I'd say for CMOs out there, your idea is your ticket actually to commercial success. Like when we are all kind of feedbacking something into submission, we are essentially directly reducing the amount of profit that we're going to make.
And so that's a great pivot, actually, for my final 2 points.
Oh, I love a pivot.
Today. Yeah.
Expert pivoter.
You spoke earlier, both of you, actually, about facilitating those boardroom discussions, going in and helping to sell in that creative idea. So maybe you could talk to me a little bit about why it's so important to invest in creativity and how you help your clients have those conversations. Because, as everyone knows, this year it's been a bit turbulent economically, and during periods of economic turbulence, a lot of brands cut their budgets. Ad and marketing budgets are often the first to go, despite a lot of research actually showing that those who continue to invest or double down actually do better off. So how do you have those conversations?
I think, No. Yeah. So I think you do have to put the pieces of evidence before clients that really build the case for why a brand is your surest path to profit. It's also your surest path to resilience in turbulent times. If you don't have a strong brand, you don't have the suspension in a car, because there's going to be potholes. Like every brand knows that now. If they're not economic potholes, they're social or cultural potholes. If your brand isn't built on strong foundations, if it's not recognizable, if you don't know what your assets are, then you're kind of going to fall at the first hurdle. I think there's incredibly powerful stock market data, economic data, all of that to support the case for a brand. One of the key pieces of information that I tend to point to is how much intangible assets have become part of the base of the stock market. Like any stock market around the world, if we look back 25 years, tangible assets were where value was at. And that's things like your warehouses or your manufacturing or your equipment. Now, intangible assets make up, I might not be exactly right in this, but somewhere around 80% of the total value of the stock market. So that's things like your IP, your creative work, your brand, like it's your brand. And so I think that to a board, which is essentially like it's a board with a capital B, but it's also a board with a small b. They're all human beings. I think you can absolutely make the case that says this is your value, this is what your shareholders are now investing in. Why, you neglect that at your peril, and you do.
I'm not going to add anything to that Megamind didn't already, So it is just such a brilliant answer. So kind of ditto. I think but the thing that I would add, I think a lot of people think that creatives don't get that. And it's just not true. The best creatives, they're talented, and yes, they're creative and artistic and all that kind of stuff, but they do understand that you're running a business and they understand ROI and all those kinds of things. But what everyone has to remember is that it's my job to push, because we know the more interesting an idea, the longer an idea, the more that value you can put into an idea, the more valuable it becomes. So it's always our job to push from a partnership point of view, but we do get it. You just, that's what you come to us for, to make you stand out. So
that is so true. And it was, I must say, about 10 years in, I was kind of thinking, well, the FE's like, that's like my bit, and I'll like hold other. And of course it's not true. And the best creatives are the ones that are a bit strategic. The same as I would say the best strategists are the ones who are a bit creative, but know how to channel that rather than trying to actually have the idea themselves, a trap we've all fallen into. But yeah, I think it's absolutely in the partnership, and obviously the wider partnership with the rest of the team as well.
Fantastic. And then coming to my final question, so VML obviously stands for creating connected brands. So I'd love to kind of tap into that a little bit and also understand the idea of measurement, because obviously if we're wanting to have these boardroom discussions, we need to rethink about how we are measuring the outcomes or the success of a campaign. And so in the context of creating a connected brand, how do you measure that and then decide on which campaigns to greenlight versus not?
I'll quickly talk about what I believe a connected brand is. And it goes back to what I said previously about a brand is a job or services personality. And if you think about the personalities that you care about, the characters in stories that you gravitate towards and engage with, they're very complete. You don't get, I'm going to pick something on, you don't think of Dumbledore, right? And he's Dumbledore in one facet of one part of his character, and in something else he's completely alien and acts in a completely different way, or looks different or unexpected. If he did, you wouldn't engage with that character whatsoever. But so many brands do that. They've got advertising on one media or on one level that projects one personality, and then on a different, you engage with them in a different part, and it's a completely different experience. And people don't like that. They like personalities that are whole. A truly valuable brand has to be connected and deliver that same personality all the way through.
And be congruent. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think there's something about in the idea of a connected brand. It's kind of knowing its connection to culture, but not. I think there's sometimes you kind of have all these chats about how like brands are culture and all that. And I personally, that's not quite my opinion. I think it's a bit more of almost like a values exchange, right? Yes, we can be definitely part of culture, but we're also, as brands, sometimes observers of it, or sometimes we are kind of the leaders of it. So there's an interesting piece there. On measurement, I think, look, we have seen so many advances on this, certainly particularly the last kind of 10 years or so. We've had, the long and the short of it. We've had Benane Field, we've had Ehrenberg Bass, obviously more recently, et cetera. Story could go on. Grace Kite, an econometrician in the UK who's absolutely brilliant in my opinion, and I love seeing a woman finally in the kind of real kind of gutsy measurement space. There's probably two things I'd say. The first one is, a lot of, particularly when it comes to in this market, it quite often comes to like, well, Byron Sharp says this and Mark Ritson says this. And I just always talk to our teams about, or certainly my strategy team, like you definitely need to be up to date with that, especially like the Ehrenberg Bass work, like it's, Karen Nelson Field, etc. But you also need to remember that none of those people has ever sat in a room and made an advert. Like Mark Ritson hasn't, Byron Sharp hasn't, I don't believe Karen Nelson Field has. I might be wrong about that. But there is a there's a glorious reality and beautiful constraints to everything we do that the science does not have to worry about. So we have to know how to take that and use it. The other thing is that measurement is great, but on its own, we need to know what to do with all the stuff that we're measuring, which I'd say is still a bit of an issue. We're still a little bit paralysed rather than analysed. And I think at the end of the day, there's people out there are not buying your amazing measurement system, however great that measurement system is, and however your real-time your visualizations are, and however comprehensive your dashboards. If we don't, again, it kind of comes back to the gut instinct. You can have all the tools in the world, but if you don't know how to use them and connect those dots in new ways to do new things, it doesn't matter. They're not going to buy more of your product to reward you for that nice visualization you had. So, and I don't mean to devalue it at all. Genuinely, I think. It's
about being selective.
Yeah, I find it really interesting, and it's learning to kind of go with it a bit. Sometimes I say stuff in meetings, people are like, "Oh, but you got," and it's like, well, no, you probably can't do exactly that, but at least ask a question of this data rather than it's not a full stop. It should be your springboard to the next thing with measurement. Just having done it does not get you a prize. Having done it, having understood it, and having used it to get the next insight no one's had, that's where the money is, I think.
I'll say something probably slightly controversial that I don't think you'll ever be able to use, but it's just got to get better. It's fucked.
No, I agree, yeah.
I really do believe, you ask any great creative what has killed more ideas, more great ideas for them than anything. And it's not creative directors, it's not bad clients, it's none of that. It's testing and research. And we all know that it's an abnormal construct, the way we do this. Mm. We know that it's not testing stuff for how interesting it is. It's testing it for, in a surreal situation, how it will tick as many boxes as possible, which literally just means bringing it back to average. Now, I know that that's a very generalistic way of looking at testing and research. But in my heart of hearts, with all this new AI and technology, my hope is that it will genuinely one day get so good that you will really see straight away, you'll be able to switch an ad on and straight away be able to see instantly really how good it is. Are people looking at it, engaging with it, et cetera, et cetera? Because the minute that's happened and someone can assign a value to that, clients will start buying it. We will start making it. We will be able to make things that are beautiful and interesting and emotional and entertaining, and there will be a tool that can show a client how good that is before it goes out into the real world. But we don't have that now.
I agree.
Basics.
Yeah, it is, and it's also, I think, I agree with that, and a lot of the, however great we make these test, and there are some good, there are some kind of strong and helpful ways of testing ads, but ultimately, you're right, it is about regressing to the mean. That is essentially what it will tell you. I think one of the best ways around that, one of the very best clients I've ever worked with, the thing that separated them was the ability to be decisive. Mm-hmm. So they would decide of the ideas that we'd presented, which idea they were going with, and they used testing as a way to understand before that ad went out, here's some of the questions we might be asked, here's some of the things that might not go down so well, here's
avoid
some of
landmines.
Yeah, exactly. And also, here's some of the points that people, when people have seen that kind of link, the animatic or whatever it might be, here's some of the things that actually, those are the bits they're talking about. So how can we make even more out of those? Not how can we bring this down to a place where no one has a problem with it? Because it's in those tensions, those problems, that actually the magic lies.
And what I love about that is, to me, that sounds like it goes all back to your gut instinct, gut data. So I think that's a fantastic place to end on.
Right.
Thank you both so much for joining, and thank you everyone for joining the WPP podcast from the WPP house at South by Southwest Sydney. See you next time.